The four horsewomen are not the Mount Rushmore of WWE female superstars from the 2010s. Now, some of them might be, but I'm actually going to start controversially on this video and say not all of them make my top four. So hopefully you're going to enjoy this video. It's been a controversial series so far. The last one we did, which was the male wrestlers from the 2010s, certainly had a controversial pick or two. I'm joined by the one and only Mr. NX Steve once again. Like we see, female wrestlers from the 2010s all put together for our top four. NX Steve, I'm looking forward to hearing your choices and would like to know your first one.
I agree with you in the fact that the Four Horsemen are not, but my first answer is Charlotte Flair. Arguably the greatest female wrestler of all time with the amount of accomplishments that she has achieved. It speaks for itself. Charlotte Flair is my number one.
She's also been in a WrestleMania main event, which is something that she's done. She was involved as well in the first female main event pay-per-view, which I think was Hell in a Cell as well back in 2016. You know, she's a multiple-time world champion. Like you say, she gets far too much hate for what she's, I think, because her name's a Flair, and probably because she's always been winning women's championships when you probably don't want her to. But still, if you take that away, you actually peel back behind the championships. It's one of the greatest performers of all time. She is part of the Four Horsewomen. She had a great run from NXT, and of course when she got called up on the main roster in 2015 all the way through to the end there, she ended Nikki Bella's long reign, of course, as Divas champion, was the champion that changed it from Divas to women's champion, and she's had some great matches like with the likes of Sasha Banks, with Becky Lynch as well, of course Evolution, the last woman standing match. So yeah, Charlotte Flair definitely deserves to be on this Mount Rushmore. She's a pick for me as well.
Yeah, dude, like I said, just the foundation of women's wrestling. It's really hard to not pick Charlotte Flair. But anyway, on to my number two. It is Becky Lynch. The rise that Becky Lynch has in the 2010s from being no one, essentially, and getting booked really poorly to becoming the man, becoming one of the hottest stars in WWE in this decade. Can't not have Becky Lynch on this Mount Rushmore.
You cannot. Of course, we mentioned the first ever women's main event of a WrestleMania. Becky Lynch wasn't just in it, she won it. That in itself is grand enough. She, at that point in the company, was not just the biggest female star, she was the biggest star in the company. She was treated as the main event even more than Seth when he was world champion. That's how over Becky was at that time. Becky Lynch had risen from when she turned on Charlotte Flair as well at that SummerSlam before. Everyone just got on side. She was supposed to be a heel, but she was loved too much. Man, Becky, she couldn't be ignored.
Exactly. Like even little things like she's one of only 3 female superstars to ever grace the cover of the video game, for example. In fact, I would only say the actual one because Becky was on the general release one. Bianca and Rhea were on the special edition version, so not everyone got that copy. Do you know what I mean? She just was that big of a massive star in WWE. Like I said, the hottest star in all the wrestling during the 2010s.
Absolutely, and it's only continued on into the 2020s as well. Becky Lynch arguably is up there for female wrestlers of all time at this point, but certainly deserves it to be in the Mount Rushmore. Also is in my selection. So far, 2 horsewomen, 2 for 2 is in. Who's your pick for number 3?
And that's where my horsewomen end for me. My number 3 is Asuka. I think that the transition that she has from coming from Japan, coming into WWE, has the longest undefeated run in women's wrestling in the 2010s, is a dominant NXT champion, and then goes on to the main roster. Okay, she may lose to the other woman on the Mount Rushmore, Charlotte Flair, at WrestleMania, but she has still been a consistent part of WWE during this decade. She also, like later on towards the end of the decade, she becomes the superstar of the pandemic for me. She is the star. So yeah, for me, number 3 on my list is Asuka.
Do you know what? It's hard to argue with that one. Asuka is such an incredible performer. like you say, her run in NXT is one of the best runs ever in WWE history. Obviously, when she was called up to the main roster as well, she's the first ever Women's Royal Rumble winner, of course. She's gone on to be a multi-time Women's Champion. She's won the Women's Tag Team Championships. So she's had a great run in WWE. She doesn't personally make my Mount Rushmore, but she certainly is an honorary mention for me. There's a number of them that are going to be in this, by the way. I should mention on this video. It's actually hard to narrow this down to 4. But my number 3 is probably a bit of a personal pick as well. Was one of my favorites back in the once we got the draft period, the SmackDown new era going forward. And this person was called up from NXT, probably not expected to do very well. However, she went on not just to come and become a SmackDown Women's Champion, she would do it for Raw as well, and she'd become a 5-time Women's Champion. Alexa Bliss gets in the lineup for me, because during that period, Alexa Bliss was almost the top booked women's wrestler in WWE. Didn't matter what side. It was like Charlotte Flair ruled one side and then Alexa Bliss ruled the other side. Up until Alexa Bliss getting injured in 2018 was when things started to change. She would focus more on the women's tag team division, but she won the first ever women's elimination chamber match. She's won, like I said, the women's tag team title. She's been major focuses throughout WWE throughout the rest of that decade, and to the point that she was almost seen as someone as well that was, option for outside of WWE projects as well. She was certainly a big deal around that time period.
I generally was this close to picking Alexa Bliss over Asuka. Everything you said is absolutely 100% true. 5-time champion. Came out of nowhere and just took the women's division by storm and absolutely dominated it. And unfortunately has never returned to that hype since her injuries. But dude, is a very, very good pick.
Absolutely, indeed. Then, of course, that's when she was going through the goddess era as well. My favorite gimmick of Alexa Bliss, when you go back through the archives. But who would be your number 4 selection?
This is going to be very controversial, but this was a very big favorite of mine. Made a massive impact when they made their debut on the main roster. It's Paige. She came in from NXT. She won the Divas Championship on her first night on the main roster. You can't make a bigger star than beating AJ Lee on your first night on the main roster. She's the only woman to have ever been both NXT Women's Champion and Divas Champion, or Women's Champion at the same time to this day. That itself is an accomplishment. Unfortunately, injuries do hinder her, but for me, I picked her because she is that vital part of the women's evolution. She's a part of that point where Charlotte comes up, where Becky comes up, where Sasha comes up. Paige is a part of that, and she was one of the first NXT stars that had a following coming up to the main roster. And when she debuted on Raw after Mania, the crowd popped hard and everyone knew who she was. And that for me is a big sign of a big star when you're coming from essentially a developmental brand to the main roster.
It's really hard to argue with that. Paige, I was a massive fan of Paige back in the day. Like, when you go back to NXT, when you look at a rival like her and Emma, they both have honorary mentions for me, just purely because of that match they had at Arrival, because they were given like a length of time to have a match, which you didn't get in that time period. Main roster was getting like 2-3 minute matches. That was the most you got. Those two got something like 12 to 15 minutes, and like the crowd were chanting, "This is awesome." And I had never heard that through women's wrestling ever before that match at NXT Arrival. So for that reason, both make my honorary mentions. Doesn't make my Mount Rushmore, but Paige, like you say, she was the anti-diva. She was, unique branding, one of a kind. And should injuries have not played a factor, maybe some other stuff as well, I think that she could have had a long and successful career in WWE. But of course, she was forced to retire after a certain point. But she did become a general manager as well, and she did a great job of that when she was in that position as well for SmackDown. So yeah, I mean, for me, I think that it's a fantastic choice, but fortunately doesn't get my selection. Now, I came close to making a strong, controversial decision. Now, she's no, not pre-mode. Maybe worse to some people. Now, the reason she's not in, she's got an honorary mention. So I'm going to give the honorary mention first, then I'm going to say who the 4th person is. The honorary mention is Ronda Rousey. Now, my reasoning for it is because of the fact that she's the other name that was in that WrestleMania main event. Really, she should be in there but if you look at it, she was only in the company for like 12 months. That's why I've not kept her in there. But when she was around, shit got done because Ronda Rousey was there. They got women's pay-per-view. Every gimmick match under the sun that was possible to do for women, it seemed to be given because Ronda Rousey was around, and everything felt like it was treated as a big deal for the women's division before, and you could argue for a time afterwards. The women's division didn't have as much focus on it. It got better than what it was perhaps in the start of the 2010s, the 2-minute matches. We'd got above that. But when Ronda was there, it did go to a different level for a period. However, she's not making my Mount Rushmore because she was there for 12 months. And although she had, I think, a fantastic start, she had one of the best debut matches ever, that run didn't quite continue. And you would argue that when it came to the WrestleMania match, shoulder was controversially not on the mat as well. Don't know whether it was meant to be, not meant to be. It's irrelevant at this point. And we never got the match with Becky Lynch and Ronda, which also is disappointing. So she comes out, and the person coming in is Sasha Banks. The reason is, look, it's another 4 horsewoman. So 3 out of 4 have made it. So it's not as controversial as the start of the video. Thank you for sticking with us. But I mean, she was in the first ever women's main event of a pay-per-view as well with Charlotte Flair. Takes 2 to tango in that Hell in a Cell match. Sasha Banks as well has won multiple women's championships as well. She kept losing them first as well, but she had great storylines, strong fan base. Every match meant something, and to be fair, as an in-ring performer, especially around that period, was fantastic. Arguably one of, if not the best in WWE around that time period.
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking to see when WrestleMania, so it's 2021, so it's this decade, when she main events night 1 with Bianca. But just to go back to Ronda Rousey quickly, I agree that she does deserve an honorable mention. For me, though, unfortunately, it's kind of like after that first match in that tag team with Kurt Angle, everything outside of the ring I thought was really good. It's the inside of the ring where it kind of was like, yeah. But I understand where you're coming from, being part of that main event, and she did elevate the women's division with her presence alone because of her coming from UFC and her background being this legit badass who could legit hurt people. So I agree with that. I don't even mention I think is deserving. On to Sasha Banks. I think, for me, I agree with everything you said. I just think Sasha was too easy of a pick. Like you said, first woman to ever main event a pay-per-view with Charlotte Flair. Very true. Also a very decorated women's champion. But I just like, for me, I feel for me that she almost is, by the end of the 2010s, she's living in Charlotte and Becky's shadow. And it's kind of hard for her to step out of that mold where you've got Becky, who has been the biggest star in the company, and you have Charlotte, who is the biggest star of the company. It's kind of hard to break the mold, which is why I didn't pick her, but she is an honorary mention, though. She is truly deserving of it.
Absolutely, of course, the first ever women's tag team champion, along with Bayley as well. Who, of course, Bayley is going to get the honorable mention. Don't worry, everybody. She is in the conversation. When you look with NXT, for example, obviously the match with Sasha Banks at TakeOver Brooklyn, damn, it puts a lot of feelers on the map. Everyone was taking women's wrestling a lot more seriously, and that match is something that people go back to as being one of the pinnacle moments. And obviously the respect 2 out of 3 falls, or I think it's a 30 women Iron Man match that they have, Iron Woman match, if you will, which main evented that takeover, which was fantastic as well. Bayley, though, for me, it was character development that went wrong. When she got called up to Raw, she was supposed to be the hugger, the next John Cena, but for the women's division, instead they kind of brutally destroyed that character to the point that she had to go away from the role model and she had to turn heel. And that heel turn really properly came into fruition in 2019. And when it did kick in, that Bayley then it went into the 2020s was another level. And unfortunately, most of that is not the Bayley that we saw in the 2010s, which of course is the hugger gimmick, which for me just didn't live up to the expectation of what it should have done. Yeah, I mean,
she's kind of like the same as Paige, for instance. She already had a massive following coming from NXT up to the main roster. I think whether it possibly being the fact that she doesn't come up with Charlotte, Sasha, and Becky when those 3 come up initially, whether it hinders her being on that Mount Rushmore. But like you said again, with the character, she was a demographic character, and it's hard to get that character across when you're trying to appeal to 8 to 9 to 10-year-old girls. Do you know what I mean? So I agree with what you're saying. 2020s is a different story. Bailey is definitely in that conversation now, with a bigger chance of being on that Mount Rushmore.
Completely agree. But without further ado, do you have any other further honourable mentions?
I mean, dude, there's a couple. You got to put Nikki Bella in there. She's obviously a multi-time Divas champion. She basically dominated the women's division for the early periods of the 2010s. It'd be rude not to throw Nikki Bella in there.
Certainly not. She actually had the record before Charlotte would go on to break that record as well. And of course, Nikki Bella broke a record of AJ Lee, of course, who had left the company as well. So she deserves also that mention
AJ
as
Lee.
well. Yeah, AJ Lee definitely done, just from character work as well as in ring work. At one point, she was carrying that women's division. Nikki Bella had improved as well, leaps and bounds when she took over. And for me, one I will give a shout out with, perhaps a surprise to a few. Carmella, I think, deserves a shout out. First women's Money in the Bank winner. Yes, controversial fashion, she did so, but then she'd go on to win the second one in legit fashion on SmackDown, and of course would go on to become a women's champion as well. So for that reason, I think she definitely deserves an honourable mention.
Yeah, she obviously is one of the only 2 women to have gone past a day with that Money in the Bank briefcase, so I'll give her props for that. And yeah, to be fair, one of the most fun cash-ins that we've probably had as well, with her cashing in as well.
Absolutely, indeed there. But to finish off the video then, your 4 picks then for women's Mount Rushmore from the 2010s.
Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, Asuka, and Paige.
Well, for me, it's Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, Alexa Bliss, and Sasha Banks. Do you agree with us? It's now time to get involved in the comments below. Who is your Mount Rushmore of the WWE female wrestlers from the 2010s? You can check out the men's version of this video on your screen right now, as well as the playlist where you can see every episode that we've done so far, including Hell in a Cell matches and as well the NXT male wrestlers from the Black and Gold era. Like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you for the next one here on SCW. If you've got any suggestions you want to see for this series, let us know now in the comments below.